Hi, welcome. In this series, what we're going to do is sort of concentrate on what I love to paint, which are flowers. I have, luckily, a really nice old garden in the back that I can take some really interesting photos. As well as I'm also living in a neighborhood that people have some beautiful gardens that I can sort of tiptoe through with my camera and take some pictures. I thought I would start this segment, this one in particular, and talking about photos a little bit more. I have done this previously in some of the other segments that we've done, and on this one I thought I'd start this one the same way, because you're going to see how on the board here there are a variety of different photos and taken from different angles, and that is sort of what you should be aiming for. We don't always see things like individually, we see things differently, and yet as someone who's taking a picture to paint from, you have to start thinking how this is going to translate into a painting. So taking your photos, you're going to try and sort of come up close, or you don't have to come up too close. I have found the best way to do this is to actually take a picture of, in this case, a rose or whatever, and then I go to playback mode, and then I start to sort of toggle in and coming closer into the picture I've already taken and go left and right and up and down, and then save those images, which is what I have done probably. I'm looking at these, with each one of these, I've done that. So the photo that you see is not me getting down really close to them like this, but actually sort of standing back, either, you know, getting down lower or sort of seeing up higher, or for instance in this one, actually tilting my camera way back so I'm getting that sort of nice blue sky in behind, which is something that I really like these days, is to have that sort of nice blue sky in behind. And that's one of the things I think we're going to be painting along with as well. So I thought I'd show you a range of sort of different things that we've done and sort of what it looks like. Some you can get really up close, and so you're going to get a very dark background. Others you're going to see sort of the foliage in behind, which is sort of fun to play with. Some of it just a little bit of both. So there's a little bit of foliage, a little bit of blue sky, and sort of that's sort of what you paint into it. So today what we're going to do, I've painted this one actually before, and you may or may not have seen it in the background in behind me. This is I had a really lot of fun painting these daffodils. But for today what we're going to do, I think we're going to paint these poppies against the fence, because again we get a little sense of learning how to do perspective, how to play with our colors that way, and we get all the sort of peekaboo things in behind the fence and how to deal with that. So I'll see you in a bit, and we'll start painting our red poppies. Well, we're set up, we're ready to go. We have our photo clipped onto our board. We've got our prepped canvas, and you'll probably notice that I'm using, or you may not, I don't know. These are 11 by 14s in case you're interested, these little stretch canvases, and they are the narrow ones. So they're not that expensive, but they're sort of fun to work on. I like sort of the give and take a little bit of the canvas, as you know. So we're going to prep it, we've prepped it, now we're going to draw on it with our chalk to sort of figure out where we're going to put things. Now, this can be a little bit tricky because the length of this photo is not proportionate to the length of our canvas. So we have to do a little bit of adjustment, a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do though, we're going to sort of start sort of in the middle basically of this photo, sort of this piece. That's sort of a little bit off center. And so I've sort of I'm going to off center it here. So I'm going to start with this board here first. So I'm going to come down, if I can get my chalk to work here. And come down. And then I'm going to come over on the other side, get this over here a little bit better. See this negative space in here? It's a little bit wider than the others. You'll find that in perspective, this is sort of why we're doing this. You're going to find again that this board here is wider than this one, and this one is wider than that one, this one is wider than that one. That helps to give us the perspective of what we're going to be doing, as well as the angle of this lower board down here also helps us with our perspective. You're going to find that the angle of these poppies in behind are perfect for what we want. I couldn't have lined it up better if I had tried. These sort of come down on a nice angle down this way as well. So we're creating this sort of angle coming down this way, angle going back, and in sort of where they're both sort of opening up to is this nice poppy that's peeking around the edge of the boards. This photo, I took it as is. This was no adjustment about anything. So I was just sort of, sometimes you just get those lucky nice snapshots of things. And this is one of them, so it's sort of fun to play with. So even in between the boards, the space as well gets sort of, this is wider than this space, and this space is a little bit wider than that space, and so on. So as things go away from us, they get smaller, right? Our spaces get smaller. So that's part of a very basic sort of class on Perspective 101. So I'm going to draw this other board in here, make it a little bit wider. A little bit wider. And I'm not going to do the edge part of it. I'm not going to worry about that just at the moment. I'm going to sort of include that as my overall sort of sense of how wide I want these boards to be. Now for the poppy itself, all I'm going to do is draw in sort of a basic shape of it. I'm not going to worry about all the ins and outs of what's happening to that flower. I'm just going to give myself a little bit of information. And then I'm going to draw this line through here just to get that nice sort of idea of that perspective coming through. A little bit of this board at the back here. Whoops, wrong spot, wrong spot. These are the individual in-between spots. This is the advantage of using chalk. You can easily erase. Okay, now I'm going to sort of again do some circles, basic circles, where these other poppies are going to be. And in doing these basic circles, you're going to see for sure where there's a couple here and a little guy up here. Okay, so you can see these ones coming down here, which is nice. This coming back right up into this. This is going to lead us, these lines are going to lead us right into this poppy, which is what we want. This is our main focal point. Don't forget, everything that we're painting, we need to have a main focal point, two other focal points of lesser interest, so we move the eye around, and then we'll also have what we call a rest spot. So now we've mapped it out, and I'm going to do an underpainting, and I'm going to do an underpainting in what color? You got it, blue, because the poppies are very orangey. So I'm going to do the poppies in a blue color, and then I'm going to do a little bit of the greenery kind of stuff, but in a pale pinky kind of color. Okay. So now we're ready to paint. We're going to start with this underpainting, and as I mentioned earlier, we're going to start with our poppies first, and we're going to do them in a light blue. So I'm going to move some white over. I'm very partial to this manganese blue these days. So we're going to use it. And I'm going to sort of start just sort of mapping out a little bit, in a little bit more detail, sort of the shapes of what I'm seeing here. Now I want some of these spots to be a bit lighter, because they are, because that's also part of the reason that we do this underpainting, is so we can start to see the tonal values of things. We can start to see areas that are lighter and things that are darker, and start to give perspective, as it were, to our object right off the bat, which is sort of a fun thing to do. And I'm going to put a little bit of darker stuff right here in the middle, just so I know that's where it's going to be. And we sort of mapped out easily our nice little poppy here with nice broad strokes, fair bit of paint, as you can see. And I think, again, that is something that you need to realize you need to do, is that, and you probably will have found in previous classes, is that paint with a fair bit of, not gobs of paint, but there is a, I'm covering up. I'm not just sort of doing a wash or a glaze. Oftentimes I'm in a class and I'll come around and people are doing this process, of course. And I was like, you know, it's just like as though you're not painting, you're just doing all this watery glaze kind of stuff. Oh, well, I just thought that's what I do. I don't want to put too much down there until well, forget all that. Come on in, start painting. Goodness gracious. Start putting these colors in here. Start seeing what you're going to be doing. And that's, again, the beauty of acrylics is that you can, if you don't like it, dry it or let it dry naturally and paint over it. Don't worry about it. A little bit of orange over here, a little bit up here. And I thought so. There is a bit. I'm sorry. My arm probably came right across the front of the camera there. My camera guy is probably having a fit that I did that. But anyway, there we go. So now we sort of mapped out. So you can see again, this is our line of our poppies coming through here. This nice little guy is going to be quite nice through here. So now I'm going to clean my brush because the background part now is basically green in between the slats, that is, like the real background stuff. So I'm going to do that in a pale pink. So I've got some quinacridone red here, which makes a really nice pink. And I'm going to use it to start to put in some background underpainting for our green. Nice and light again because it's going to be a very pale green. And I'm not going to do all the leaves that you see. There's lots of leaves back in here too as well. But you're going to see that we can just interestingly sort of put in some tonal values that will indicate leaves without having to paint all of them. I mean, we've got poppies back in here. We're going to have the color green. We're going to, therefore, I mean, we're going to, or not we, but the people who, well, you, as I should say, I guess, but people who look at your work are going to assume, because it is green and it is a floral picture, that they are actually representing leaves. Do we need to do each one? No, we don't. But what I'm going to do though is where it's a little bit darker is to come in here a little bit darker as well with some of this red. Pinky color actually, I guess. Now this is what I call sort of a dirty brush because it's not, I'm not getting absolute perfect sort of, this is all dark, this is all light. It's sort of a mishmash of sort of different shades and tones, which is exactly what I want. So there we go. We've got an idea of what our tonal values are going to be like a bit and where things are going to be. I'm going to leave the cadmium orange that we used to prep our canvas for the, I'm not going to do an underpainting for them. I'm just going to leave the prepping of the canvas because the orange itself is going to really work for the blues and greens and other colors that we have in our slats in those boards there. So we don't really need to do an underpainting. So it's not always, do we have to do an underpainting for everything? No, not always. I mean, remember when we did the grapes? We didn't do an underpainting for them because there were so many colors in it. We just prepped our canvas cadmium orange and then painted those grapes right on top. So there's all sorts of different ways to approach this. All right, I'm going to blow dry this and then we're going to come back and start painting it. So now I've actually used the hairdryer to blow dry this. And looking at this, I mean, if anybody walked in and just saw this painting the way it is now, they would think that we were nuts. But we know that we're on the right track. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually start to paint this little guy, this our main character in our painting, this nice little poppy that's up there. So I'm going to add a little bit of white over here, add some orange to that. I think that will sort of do, and I can start to sort of push some of this in here a little bit. Now, another thing that you'll see me do is I will be painting, and then I'll take my brush and I'll just put the tip of it in the water, like, or even just the edge of it. Actually, it's not even the tip, just the edge of it, and that just sort of loosens up my paint, because sometimes, especially in these segments, these classes that we're doing, because I'm under so many hot lights, I'm finding my paints dry a little bit quicker than they normally do. But be that as it may, even if I was painting normally, they do have, acrylics do have a tendency to dry. So instead of, we can take our mister and mist the whole thing, which I probably should do in a few minutes anyway. But just for the paint that I'm dealing with, I can just take the tip of my brush, and it will be enough moisture on it to loosen up what I want, get a little bit more moisture there. So, and again, we want our paint to feel like soft butter. Now I added a little bit of cadmium red light to this to sort of come up into this area here a bit. Now, I'm always saying to people too, like, you don't have to be thinking that, when you're painting, in this case this poppy, that it has to be the absolute color that you want when you first are attempting to paint it. You're trying to come close, but not to sort of freak out so much that, you're trying, as I say, you're just trying to come close, but we'll be coming back to this probably a few times to touch it up, to get sort of the colors that we want. And again, that is sort of the nature of painting. This is what you should be aiming for, is that you're trying to get as close as, get as accurate as you can to the color that you want, using a little bit of cad red medium into this as well. Now I'm going to use this quinacridone violet a little bit into here. Now that's sort of a purpley red, a little bit on the darker side, but again, it's because it has purple in it, this quinacridone violet, it will help us with this inside area here, which we want a little bit darker, but not as bright as the other areas where we have, and I'm going to use it a little bit just sort of to mark things off a little bit. Clean my brush because now I've got too much on it. I don't clean my brush that often because, as you know, I like using what I classify as a dirty brush, which means if I'm in the same color, in the same family of colors, I just keep my brush working all the way through those colors. It's not because I'm lazy. It's because I want to keep that, what it helps to do is to keep that sort of continuity of colors. And again, when we're painting, this is one of the things that we try to achieve, is this continuity of color. Now I'm going to come in and sort of do a couple of these, sort of where there's these really light, bright areas. I'm going to do a very pale orange in these areas, because when I come back to help create this a little bit more detail, those really light areas, I'm going to use one of the two colors that we like to use when we do highlights, which is, think about it, what do we learn? What are those two colors that we use when we do highlights? One's yellow and the other is blue. Both of them primaries, right? And so we can use both of those colors to use as highlights. And because I'm going to do a pale blue this time for my highlights, because it will help complement the orange which we're using, which is really good, it will just, it'll just be a better color rather than the pale yellow. It will give us, and I'm going to just take some white here and just smash this in here a little bit more. While this is still wet, this is sort of what I call sort of blending right on the canvas, which you're not supposed to do, Georgia. But sometimes we can do that, and I just want to get a real lightness, and because my paint is so wet, I can do this. Now, the other thing that I realized when I was blow drying, it's not one of those things I like to point out, that when we're painting is not to use so much paint that you're actually creating. I'm going to go right over these now, these blue ones that are back in here, and create some of these nice little poppies back in here a little bit. And I'm just going to do this with some tonal value using that stacking method that we learned when we did the Cezanne class. Remember, we've been using that sort of, I talked about it in other classes as well, but the Cezanne class for sure, we really went into great detail about how that stacking method works. And you're going to find probably I use some of that technique in everything that I paint these days, which is, you know, really what I like. But getting back to what I was saying about, I started to say about paint, that you don't want it so thick that you're actually creating ridges, which is probably one of the biggest mistakes people make too, is that they use, and when they go to use, either they use too little, so they're just doing a wash over top of their canvas. The other one is that they use too much paint, and then when they do this underpainting, as we did here with the blues and the greens and stuff, that they have all these ridges. So then when they come to paint and they go to adjust things, perhaps they, you know, want to move where they had done the underpainting, it's not exactly where they want it, then they have a big problem because they have all these ridges that they've built up through using their too much paint. So when I was blow drying, I don't know if you saw me doing it or not, but I was sort of going through and I was sort of pushing down, I was sort of with my finger, I was sort of smushing, because I had done that. I had used a little bit too much paint, and there was a bit of a ridge there, and I didn't want it there, so I used my finger to sort of smush it down a bit, just in case I decided to move it. Plus, I don't like painting over top of ridges. To be truthful, I just don't like painting over top of ridges. Now I'm using a little bit of cadmium red, light, little medium, a little bit of quinacridone violet, a little bit of I've got very little left of this. I'll have to put some more out of this quinacridone, just quinacridone red, to sort of push these things in here. And I'm just going to clean my brush, rather just sort of swipe it, not clean it. Just sort of swipe it on there, so now I can come back up into here and push some of this lighter stuff up into here a little bit darker. And so I'm sort of covering up. Now, I'm not covering up all the blue, as you can see, or not, because we do know that leaving little bits of those behind is a good thing, because the little bit of blues peeking through here and there will also help enhance the orange on top. Now I'm going to go over top of this pink stuff that we put down earlier with some green. And I put it over there. I'm going to put it back over here. I always come forward from the colors that I want to use, because then I know exactly what color it came from. In this case, it's this chromium green that I want. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to it because it's a little bit flat. And I'll swipe my brush, got a bit too much on, a little bit lighter. Now I don't care that there's a little bit of red or something in that, it doesn't really matter. Swipe it again. Add a little bit more yellow to it because I want it a little bit brighter. Well, I don't like that color at all, actually. Well, which is another thing I'm saying to students is that when you're painting and you've got a color that's down there and you're not happy with it, why do you continue with it? Don't stop. It's like that, it's got a little bit too muddy for me, I think, that color. So I'm going to get rid of it and come in and use just hookers now with a little bit of yellow, cadmium yellow medium, and white, of course, to make it opaque. And I'm going to sort of slather this in here a little bit more, a little bit lighter. Now, I may or may not go over my chalk lines of my board. I'm not going to worry about that too much because that's just sort of the way it goes. I can always come back. Now I'm going to continue painting this, building up, sort of covering up this green. Again, though, coming in where it's a little bit darker with a little bit more tonal value there so I can see how my green is working. And when you come back, you will have finished all this part, as long as I will have finished all this part, and we will then start painting the boards. We did an underpainting. Now I've sort of done some basic sort of colors on top again to sort of, again, get myself a feel of what I'm going to be doing. You're going to see again how this sort of green, darker green, sort of comes down on a triangle kind of area again. Everything's leading into this guy, which is really a good thing. So we have these sort of tonal values happening here. I made this a little bit darker. I'm going to sort of lighten this part here a little bit just so you can see that where we want the darkest spot is actually not in this corner as you would think, because this is the corner. We do know, well, you say Georgia, but things as they come closer to us, you're always saying making them darker, but, and there's always a but, if we make this corner too dark, we're going to start our eye right on the edge of this corner, which we don't want to do. We don't need to do that. We want our eye to sort of come into the picture, and so we sort of did this a little bit dark, but this one a little bit darker again, only because, I'm going to sort of take off that little bit of ridge I see there. I want our eye again, everything is about how we're going to push our eye into this guy here. That is the name of the game. We want to make this Poppy our lead player. He is our, main character in our story. This is the guy that does it for us. And then we can sort of move around into the other areas. Okay, so now the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to do the boards. Now, the boards themselves, like a big sigh, because this is another lesson that's really very valuable. And this is probably a really key thing in that when we're looking at something, it's not just seeing the top color. We do know these boards are old weathered things, and so they're going to be on the bluish side. Notice I didn't say gray, because gray isn't a color, it's a shade or a tone. So we always are thinking in terms of color. So we're going to make these sort of a mauvey, bluey color to begin with, and then we can, just as nature did, we can start putting the green, whatever all that stuff is, on top of the boards. We're going to do that as well. We're not going to try and make that color. We're going to do the board in this sort of, bluey gray, I said gray, that bluey sort of purpley color. And then we will, as nature did, put this sort of green, mossy, stuff that's on top. Now to do that, we're going to use ultramarine blue. And I'm going to put that right on top of some blue I've already got here, because it's fairly dry now, and that was the blue that we used to do the poppies with. The reason I'm mentioning ultramarine blue, because it is already sort of a purpley blue. So let's see how that looks to begin with. Yeah, not too bad. I'm going to do it a little bit darker, because this board is coming closer to us, a little bit darker still. And there we go. So now I'm going to paint this board. And it's got a little bit too much purple in it for me, so I'm going to add a little bit of this manganese a little bit to it again, because I will make it a little bit more of a, I love that color. As you find, when you paint with me, I have certain, all of a sudden I'll have nice preferences for colors, and I use them everywhere. But that's what we do when we're artists. We find certain colors that really turn our crank, as it were, and those are the colors that we generally use. And you will find this even when you are decorating your house, for instance, or painting your walls in your house. You're going to have certain colors that you really like over top of others. And we're just sort of drawn to certain colors, and that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Now this board comes right down and off the canvas, which is really nice. I really like that part of it, because that gives us that nice anchor to this picture, which is really perfect. Whoops. Yeah, I'm just going to leave that for now. Now we're going to do the next board, which is a little bit lighter, because it's going away from us. So we're going to sort of paint it. Now, as you can see, I'm not doing that stacking method too much. I'm actually sort of painting all this in, but I'm just doing a basic color underneath, and I will be doing more of that stacking approach to the painting as we move along. So interestingly enough, you're just going to find just from even the tonal values in these how this board is actually appearing to go further away. It's a little bit narrower and it's a little bit lighter. So that's what we want. And then we got this one. And behind this poppy. And down to about here someplace. Even when I'm painting, I'm looking at all these spaces around, the negative spaces around things. And you will find the more that you paint, this is sort of what you will be seeing as well, which is what we want. We want to be using our negative spaces as much as, or even more so than our positive spaces, actually. I like the way our negative spaces interact and sort of help us with our... All right, so we got sort of some basic color down here. And now I'm going to do some of this stuff at the back here. I'm going to add a little bit more purple to it. This stuff coming through here, in between the sort of back. And I'm not going to worry too much about it. I just sort of want to get it in there a little bit so I get a sense of what it is. I'm going to add a little bit of this quinacridone violet to this stuff. Definitely down into this corner, a little bit on top, so we can see this. I really, I must admit, I like this photo for a lot of reasons, and one of them is just that we get to see how the boards work, how they come together and help us with the perspective of this piece. It's really a nice sort of piece for that. I know. It's like, goodness gracious. I know, well, I can't help it. There's just certain things I really do like. And in a photo that really, you know, especially in a photo like this, that's really going to help me paint and create an interesting painting. And when you have these kinds of things that are a little bit of interest, a little bit of detail, it's not just all about flowers. There is this sort of nice little, interesting detail in the wood, which is a nice thing. It really does help us create a little bit more interest in our piece. So again, as you can see, I've slowly sort of mapped this out. I'm going to come back in now on top of this guy, because he probably is going to be not as dry as I want him to be, but he's not too bad. So we can start to come in. I'm going to put some of this ultramarine blue out here, and I'm going to mix it right in here with my hookers and start to paint this green on top here. Now I'm going to play Mother Nature, as it were, and start to, as a wash or a glaze kind of thing, over top of this. And get all of that mossy look that's sort of happening to our board. There's a nice little cutout in this board too here that happens about here someplace, and I'll put that in later. Not going to worry about it too much at the moment. And a little bit more onto this guy. So I'm going to slowly now sort of give myself this sense of where this green is going to come in and be over top of the blue. I'm just sort of scrape it in here. You can hear me sort of scraping away with my brush. Just so I can get sort of an idea of sort of how it's going to look. And I think, wow, looking pretty good. Well, I think so, don't you? Come on, don't be so hard on yourself. This is the other thing. There is a document that I created, and it's called Georgia's Creed in her drawing classes. And it came about because there was one of my students was forever, I come around to her and she'd be, oh, it's so awful. I'm just having, I can't get this, I can't, whatever. It was always so negative about everything. And I was sort of always, being her cheerleader and saying, no, this is good, this is fine. And so then I finally went home and sort of created this creed to help, mostly her, but I didn't want her to feel sort of singled out. I handed it to everybody in the class, and everyone took it to heart except her. Don't be so hard on yourself. Painting is a joy. It's a journey. So what we need to do is start to see the colors, do as much as we can, and then take a deep breath and sort of go and have a cup of tea or something, and then come back to it. And you'll be surprised how nice it really does look. I'm going to continue painting this, and we will come back and see what else we can do to sort of finish it off. Okay, so here we are. Gee, through the magic of cameras, we're finished this picture. Now, you do know I have spent some time working on this piece, which I have. It would be sort of tedious. It'd be sort of like, as they say, the term is, watching paint dry on the wall is, be a little bit sort of too tedious. But I can point out to you what I have done to help sort of complete this picture. I went back in and did some more work on this poppy, a little bit more. You can see I use that nice light blue on top as a highlight, which is really quite nice, sort of sings out. I then took some of that light blue and pushed it down through here a little bit too. So again, it's this sort of completes this area a little bit more, which is nice. The boards I sort of worked on, did more of that, and I went back to that stacking method of putting colors down, so little bits of color here and there again. So over top of the original that we had started, now I started to sort of build up my colors again on top. A little bit more interest around here. I decided to sort of play up this knot in the board here a little bit because I found it sort of interesting. So again, it sort of helps to sort of pull our eye into this area, which is nice. What else can I tell you about the boards? You're going to see lots of color in these boards, and that, I think, is the biggest problem people have. I've had other students paint this piece, that they don't see the colors. They start off by making actually the boards brown or something, which is always odd to me, or they make them too purpley or something. I don't know what they do. But anyway, what I want you to do, and even looking at this now, you can see the variety of colors that I've used in here, and especially around where the poppy is. I mean, the colors are there anyway, and I've just sort of played with them a little bit more. So we have a little bit more interesting warm colors through here on these sort of inside edges. I really gave a little bit more detail to this area down in here. Again, just because it's sort of an interesting area and it helps with the, creating that perspective. There is that artist, Robert Bateman, that I've referred to before, Canadian artist, wildlife artist, who everyone thinks does so much detail, but in actual fact, he does very little. He does just enough that you, as a viewer, think or assume that everything is very detailed. And that, I think, is a really good approach to painting, is that we do a little bit of detail and then we assume so much more of it. And it's the same in the background, where I kept it very simple. Again, stacked my colors a little bit more so they're sort of, pushed in, did it really wet on wet, which was sort of interesting, and put in a couple of stems. With just these two stems, we assume, or our eye does, that there's a lot more detail in the background here. And I don't want that too detailed anyway. So we have the flower in detail, the boards sort of in less detail, and then the background even in less. So again, a little bit darker here, creating, I maintained that, a little bit here, less here. Again, so keeping our eye coming into this area. So we have some nice movement in this. I really like this. It was a challenge for me because I did it fairly quickly, and yet I really love that approach. And I think sometimes that's a good thing that we need to do. We need to push ourselves to sort of paint outside our comfort zone. And in doing that, we can, or you can, and you will be surprised how successful you are. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. I really did. I really had a lot of fun painting this piece. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye for now. Hi, and welcome. Today, we're going to continue in the series of Georgia painting in her garden. As you can see, I've got some pictures up here, some photographs of flowers with the big blue sky in behind, and that's what we're going to concentrate on today. We're going to concentrate on the sort of backlit look, which I really love. I'm sort of really taken with that these days, I must admit. So we have a wide variety of different flowers and different sort of angles of things and how they work, and I think that's sort of interesting as well when we are moving forward now, that you are now sort of getting part of that process of how I personally think about what I'm looking for and what I really want to choose to paint from. And you can see these are sort of three from the same sort of day, same flower, same group. They were way up high over a trellis of some sort, and so I could really get underneath and really get some beautiful blue skies. I like all three of these, to be truthful, although I'm more partial to sort of this one at the top and this one at the bottom. This one, I think, composition-wise, it's like divided too much in half this way. So we have this whole section up here is blue sky, this part down here, subject matter. So in other words, it's just sort of overly balanced. It's like 1, 2, 1, 2, and it's sort of boring. Whereas these two give us a little bit more moving the eye around the whole image, which is what we want. We want those three focal points, right? Some of these, again, too, are really quite lovely, a little bit sort of further away. I think I have a closer up of this, a closer upper. I don't know if that's not a proper term. But I have something that I've come up close on this one as well, and I probably would have chosen it. This is sort of part of that, I think, that same day. I have painted this, and I don't know if you can see it in behind here, but that one sort of is in behind here, and that was sort of fun to do. And I have done this, you can see all the orange on this, where I've handled this photograph too, where I've done this yellow one. The tulips is sort of interesting in a sense that it has some sky in behind, but it's really sort of filtered coming through. And I put this up on purpose because what I did do is that I changed this background to blue. It looks quite stunning, actually. It's really quite pretty. So you can, even though you have an image with no blue sky in behind there, to put a blue sky in behind, which is sort of a nice thing. It's very quite pretty. So we're going to start, and we're going to use this photo up here today. So I'll see you in a minute, and I'll clear all this off and we'll get started. Welcome back again, and here we go. So we've got our picture up here on the board, and now we've prepped our canvas, cadmium orange of course, and we're going to start. Take my chalk, and we're going to start mapping out this piece, which can be a little challenging because there is a fair bit of information here, but that's okay. Stay with me and I'll show you how we're going to do this. We're actually going to start at the very top. We're going to start up here and we're going to see where this little guy sort of comes in. It's sort of a nice little bit of a triangle up here. Move him over a little bit more. So the nice thing about using chalk is that we can easily smudge it off, which is really perfect. I'm going to draw this stem coming down here a little bit just to see where it's going to come in. See where it sort of joins in and comes all the way down. I'm going to start from the bottom and come up the other way. Okay, so now I'm going to do very little detail, as you can see, to begin with, which is what we want. We sort of want to sort of in a map out. See this triangle area in here, which is what I'm looking at. I'm looking at this triangle area here, which is what I want to see. And then there's sort of, almost sort of through the middle of it again, is this other little hunk of, I guess it's a flower that's gone to, I was going to say gone to seed, but I don't think it's gone to seed. Well, I don't know if you could say that it's gone to seed or not, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have any petals. So then I'm going to come up. Now I'm going to come up, I'm going to see the distance from this negative space from the edge of this one to where the other one starts. And I'm going to come down and bring that into here. Again, seeing the space on this one, out to here, over there. Yeah, should be some over here, up there, down there. Okay. Over here, okay, and over there. What I'm doing when I'm drawing is to be looking at these negative spaces to see whether or not they're too big, too small, or if I'm sort of in the money. Same with this little guy. So I want to see where he sort of ends here, that little point, and make sure I've got all this nice space in here. So that's sort of the other thing that I'm looking at. And I'm going to do a little bit of these things. Now, as you can see, I do very little detail to begin with because I'm just sort of mapping out. There's no point in doing a lot of detail if you're going to have to erase it all, right? So we're just going to do some basic outlines of things just to get an idea where. And then again, I'm going to see how this needs to lift up a little bit because I'm not going to have enough room. So I'm looking at the distance from that edge of this petal over to where that green one, and oftentimes I'll even mark it like this. I'll actually draw it in. So I'm going to draw in this green petal, or green petal, green leaf. And there's some other stuff. Okay. Now there's another stem here that comes around into this other leaf that's coming through here. This sort of mess of stuff I really like. I like the challenge of putting these pieces together. It's like putting a puzzle together. So you want to be, I'm looking at all these little ins and outs of things. I just sort of drew that green leaf there, or green, I keep calling green leaf. I did say green leaf. I said it right the first time. Anyway, didn't say petal this time. And then that petal, and then. So it takes a little while to sort of map this out, and that's what we want to do. We want to take our time and map out these areas. And you're going to say, well, a flower is, they change. Why do we have to be so specific about it? What difference does it make? Because, it could look like this. And you're right, it could look like anything. Could, petals change. I mean, I could go back in 5 minutes probably and look at and take a photo of these flowers, and they could be different again probably, depending on, how bright the sun is and how much they've moved or not moved. And that is all true. But this is the photo that I'm working from. This is what I say to my students. This is the photo I'm working from. I want to sort of stay on track exactly and map out exactly what I've got because then I'm not going to get lost within it, because that's the biggest thing that students say. I'm really happy actually when students that are, when I'm teaching at these community centers are attempting to do flowers, because they find out how difficult they really are. And then they say, whoa, I didn't realize flowers were so difficult. And I go, yes, they are. But only to a point that I'm always also, then I repeat and say that when we're painting, you can paint anything. If you take yourself out of the factor that what you're looking at, for instance, in this case, is a flower. All I want you to do, what I want you to start thinking about when you're painting, is that you're just looking at color, tonal values, and shapes. That's all that you should be looking at. And if you take that approach when you're painting, you can paint anything, absolutely anything. But it's when you get yourself caught up and people say, oh, I can't paint this or I can't paint that. And it's like, no, no, no. Don't go there. Stop thinking that way. I want you to start thinking in this direction. All right, so I think I've got enough information down here, and I'm going to start painting this. We're going to do this lesson a little differently this time. I'm going to start the painting. You're going to see how I start it and how we sort of develop it. And then for a change, I'm going to have painted a lot more on it that you won't see because it's just too long of a lesson. And then, but you're going to come back to me when I will have to put in all those nice finishing touches, and that part you're going to see today as well, which is a little different than the usual classes. So I'm just going to finish off here a little bit, and I'll see you in a second and we'll start painting. Okay, here we go. We're going to start painting. We're going to do an underpainting. We have been doing, you've learned about the value of underpainting, so I don't need to sort of explain all that again to you. We do know it's important. And the underpainting is simply sort of the colors that are the opposite, as I say, of what we're actually seeing. And because we're seeing so much yellow in this painting, which is really quite nice, I really love the yellows in this, we're going to use purple, right? It's the complementary to yellow, and it's going to be a really nice underpainting color for us to use. We also want to do underpainting colors in tonal values, right? So we can start to see the colors, not so much the colors, sorry, the tonal values that we need to see. So there are some light areas and some dark areas. So I'm going to start painting this guy up here, create a little bit more of a lighter color as well, a lighter purple. And you're going to start to understand too what you're going to start to see exactly some of the shapes that we're looking at, and that's what we want as well. When you're painting, your brush strokes become very important to help you in the shape of, to create the shapes of what we want. If something's round, then we want to have sort of curved brush strokes. If something is square, then we want fairly straight brush strokes. But flowers, as in everything in nature, has some curvature to it. So we want to have all our brush strokes are going to have some little bit of a curvature to them. The other thing when we're painting is to this part, we can start to see how we can adjust our lines a little bit. We can go over our chalk lines. Our chalk lines are there as a guide, and not till we start painting oftentimes can we start to see how things actually are. And that's the other reason why I like to do underpaintings, because we can start to see exactly where the position of things are and what they should be. As you know, I've been really going on about having you try the sort of stacking method of applying color. When I'm doing my underpainting, I do a little bit of that. I'm not, too what's that word I'm trying to think of? I'm not too concerned that I do that exactly, but I will start to do, because it's how I paint normally anyway, so I'm not trying to sort of overblend things. I'm just trying to sort of block in exactly sort of where things are going to be. You're going to find probably too that these videos of painting with Georgia in her garden are going to be a little bit longer, because just for that reason, flowers do take a fair length of time to paint, to get all those lovely subtle things happening in them, which is what we are trying to capture as an artist, right? We're trying to sort of capture those lovely tonal values and shapes of things. And that's exactly what we want to do. I also like this photo because it has a nice range of, it's not just all yellow. There are some interesting sort of lighter, sort of almost bordering on white, which is sort of, will lead us into, we're going to do a segment as well, painting just white. I got some beautiful white flowers that we're going to be doing as well, which I love painting white. And you're going to say, well, can't you just slap white paint on your canvas? No, you're going to learn that white actually has a lot of color in it. Just like you're finding everything else that we paint has a lot more color in it than you think it's going to have. And that's probably one of the other things that I love to say to students is that the more color that you can put in, the more color you can add to your painting, the more natural it's going to look. There's some odd sort of things back in here of just some other part of it, some other petal coming in here, and I'm just sort of going to block them in a little bit. The backlit part of this exercise is going to be also is in finding that lovely blue color that we need to put in for that sky. Is it going to be exactly that blue? Well, I'm going to try and come close to that blue, but it might be slightly different, all depending when, what colors I end up with. Again, students are always saying, why don't we do the background first? You know, then I don't have to worry about my edges and all this other jazz or whatever, I don't know. I said, well, the reason that we don't do our background first is because we're not quite sure what these colors are going to be. I mean, every time that we are painting things, they can vary in that, say the day is a very dull gray. So even looking at this photo on a different day, the colors could change. They could look quite differently. And we all, on a personal level, see colors quite differently anyway. So some days I might see this, because I know I have painted certain pictures a couple of times, and every time I paint them, they look quite different. And that's the reason. I mean, maybe I didn't have my, 6th cup of coffee or something, or the sun wasn't shining that day, or maybe the sun was shining that day. There's all sorts of reasons why we see colors a little differently on different days, and that's what we want. Now I'm just going around and just sort of picking up areas where the flower is. I'm not doing the green leaves and all that stuff yet. I'm just sort of plunking this stuff into where the petals are. Now I'm going to clean my brush, push against the edge, take off most of the water. Now I'm going to do the green. Now the green, we're going to do pink or red, as the case may be, because red is the opposite of green, right? It's the complementary to green. And I'm going to do this, drag this over here so I can sort of see where my stems are going to be. And this little stem takes a little bit of a bend here, which is sort of nice. I think it's also that students don't realize, and what their work starts to look a little static, is that they make their stems too straight. Again, see, this has a little bit of a nice bend to it, and that's sort of what we want. We want to sort of have these sort of nice little bends and twists of things, which is what, and a little bit of these, which I sort of indicated them, I didn't draw them in completely, but I'm just sort of going to sort of give an idea of sort of where they are, these, I don't know what you call these things that come down from a flower. The bottom part, these little traily things, for technical term. I don't know what they're called. I'm just sort of going to put them in here just to indicate them a bit. Then we're going to do these petals. See, there I go again. What is with me today, calling leaves petals? Sorry about that, folks. Anyway, leaves. We're going to put those in. And I'm just going to block these in. I'm not going to worry too much about these in a sense of spending a lot of time on them, although I do want to get that sense of tonal value still. So very quickly, because what I want us to get to is actually painting on top of this, because I want you to start to see again more of how we. And again, I'm still sort of mapping out, which is what I'm always doing. I'm always trying to make sure that I've got things in the right spot. And even though I'm painting fairly quickly and it looks fair and it appears fairly loosely, which it is, but I'm still looking at my negative spaces. I'm still sort of mapping things out a bit. I'm still trying to figure out where things are going to be or should be, as the case may be. Okay, so I'm just going to continue sort of mapping these out. I'm almost finished. And then we're going to start painting right on top here so you can start to see how we're going to start this piece. And I'll see you in a few minutes and we'll come back and carry on. It's going to be a pretty piece. Okay, so here we are. I've used a hair dryer on here to blow dry it. You probably saw me sort of putting my finger up in here to sort of smudge a little bit. What I'm doing is sort of increasing the drying process to sort of smudge off sort of those spots, but also so I don't have any ridges. So oftentimes when we are painting this underpainting and we use a little bit too much paint, I don't, but you might. And then we go to change it. We want to change something. We've got this ridge now here, and we don't want it. Now, if that happens, if you happen to have too much paint down, you've got all these ridges happening, and you don't want them, and because you want to change them for whatever reason, the way to get around that is just take a little bit of sandpaper, a little bit of very fine sandpaper, and just go over top of it and just sort of scrape it off, and it will sand those little ridges off. Another one of those little tips. So now we're going to start painting our flowers as we actually see them. Now these flowers, I got a little bit of purple still on my brush here, so I'm going to sort of take that off. And we're going to start with the yellow. Now, again, push your brush against the edge, get all that moisture off. I then tap my brush on my paper towel again to make sure I get all my moisture off, because I want my brush wet, but I don't want all that water still dripping down onto my palette. Okay, so we're going to start with this yellow up here. I've got some cadmium yellow deep out and some cad yellow middle. I'm going to start with the deep first. And starting to apply this and thinking, and then I look at it. So I put one brush stroke down and I think, is this exactly what I want? And in this case, the answer is no, and most chances are it probably will be no. Because we need to sort of do, as I say, like little color swatches of color, right? We need to sort of figure out sort of what they're going to be. And again, even within this area up in here, this small little segment, there are a small little area, there are a whole bunch of tonal values in there. Do I need to sort of get into all of those? Well, I don't want to get into too much detail of too much information about this fellow up here, because he is at the top of the canvas. And as interesting as he is, we don't want our eye to linger too much there. Our main focal point is this big yummy guy here. I mean, we can start here, so it's going to be sort of like 1, 2, and then sort of 3 over here. That's sort of how our eye is going to move. When you're painting, you want to sort of figure out where those spots are, where your focal points are going to be. It is important to sort of figure that out to begin with, where your focal points are going to start, where they're going to go, because it will help you in when you're painting, because you're going to realize that your main focal point needs to be fairly strong, needs to be fairly, the colors need to be fairly defined, fairly strong, edges fairly strong, all those kinds of things. Now, having said that as well, though, you're going to find, whoops, sort of went off edge there, I don't want that over there too much, is your focal points can change. As you're painting, I'm just going to put the tip of my brush in the water and bring it back down to here a little bit, sort of loosen this paint up. As I've mentioned before, under these lights, when we're doing these videos, it dries my paints out a little faster than normal. I'm going to use a little bit of yellow ochre into this as well. Introduce a little bit of it. So you're finding I'm probably adding a little bit of cadmium orange as well to some of this. And because I paint, as I've mentioned before too, is with a dirty brush, meaning that I've got other paint on here. And that's why I like to do that, because I get a sort of nice transfer of color, which is what I want. I want my paint to have, or my images that I'm painting to have that nice sort of crossover of connection of color. And this is sort of a good way of doing it. And you're going to also see that I also keep all my colors. Right now I'm painting all these nice yellows, variety of different yellows. I'm keeping them all in the same area. My classes at one of the community centers has just started, and it's interesting, and all these people, and I've got new people coming and people who have been coming to me for a while in the same class, which is always sort of fun. And the people who have been coming to me for a while, and they hear me, giving instructions to the new people, and this is sort of what, the first thing, not the first thing, but one of the things that I talk about is keeping your palette fairly organized. If you keep your palette fairly organized, all your warm colors over here, for instance, all your cool colors over there, keep them in the same order, you are always going to be able to find your colors. It always amazes me that people have this hodgepodge of stuff all over the place, and then they can never find anything. And I'm thinking, well, golly gee, I wonder why. It's because you got your palette all over the place. Now, these flowers, this guy is fairly yellow. This one sort of down through here again, sort of, there's more of this sort of yellow coming through here. I'm going to go over to this fellow because he has this nice sort of variety of a little bit pale yellow, but into that sort of white spectrum of things that we're going to start to play with. So I'm going to add some white over here, pick up a little bit of this lighter stuff. So that's the other thing I will use. I'll use the colors I've already mixed up that are nice and light and pick from that pile as well, because it's already nice and light. Now, that's a bit too bright to my eye, so I want to reduce it down. One of the ways to reduce down a yellow is well, we can always use orange. Orange will sort of, knock a color down a bit. But because this is yellow, I can use purple. And because I've got this sort of purple, I'm going to sort of borrow from this really light stuff here and mix that into that. See how that pushed that color down a bit? It reduced the value of it. It darkened it, but not really. Watch what happens when I put this up here now. So now it becomes nice and soft, and that's what I want. I don't want it that really bright yellow. I'm going to add a little bit more. So again, now as you see when I'm painting, I'm not trying to overblend my colors. I'm putting them side by side. I'm just slowly putting them. I'm going to borrow a little bit more of this purple though over here. So I can come in here and do this color in here. I'm still using this sort of stacking method of putting colors down. I don't try to being that blending of colors that people get so wrapped up in, because we do know that our eye will do the blending for us, right? We do know this. We have shown that in other segments where we've now you're going to find I'm going to clean my brush here a little bit because I know I'm going to have too much purple and stuff on it, so give it another swipe. We do know our eye will do the blending for us, and that's what we want. We want our eye and we want our images to look nice and soft, but at the same time, we don't want to have... I like seeing brush strokes. I really do like seeing brush strokes. So this is sort of what I really, am attempting to get you to do as well, because we want to see these brush strokes. I'm going to continue painting this, and you can see it's going to be basically all the same sort of colors. I'm going to build this up, and then you're going to come back and we're going to continue on top of it. We're going to actually finish this picture together, which is going to be a little scary for me because I don't think I've actually finished, like spent a lot of time with you in finishing a picture. So this will be challenging for me, and it will be nice for you to see exactly how we're going to finish a painting. See you in a bit. So you can see I've been busy painting, and I've actually put in some of the blue sky as well. So I worked on my flowers, same colors that we were using before, sort of build, to sort of build up these in here. Put in my green leaves. And this time for my green leaves, though, you'll be interested to know that I use, it's called phthalo green. And this phthalo green is a really nice green as well. I mean, I'm very partial, as you probably have seen in previous episodes, is I like Hooker's green. But this phthalo green is a very nice green to use as well. And so I sort of developed my leaves. And so then when I got to that point, then I went and put my blue sky in, because I wanted to start to see where that was going to go. I was sort of, like yourself, we're sort of anxious to get to the blue sky. But if you look at this blue sky to the blue sky that's in the photograph, it's slightly different. It's not the blue that's in there. This is has a little bit more of a turquoisey kind of color to it, which is what I like. How did I get that color? Well, I used ultramarine blue, manganese blue, and a little bit of this phthalo turquoise. So that gives it that little bit of a turquoise. So I used the three blues together. And we do know the magic number for combining colors is 3. And beyond that, then we create mud. So I can recreate this color anytime I want, hopefully. No, you can. If you've only got 3 colors in whatever color it is that you've created, then you will always be able to recreate those colors. Now, we're going to continue painting this little guy. As you can see, I left a fair bit of the orange showing through. I love seeing that orange. And I may have mentioned before too that when I am painting, and if I happen by chance to cover up more of that cadmium orange than I really want to, I will actually come back in and actually reintroduce it here and there, because I do like it showing. It adds that little bit of warmth, because it is a warm color, especially the cadmium orange that I use. It's a really nice, rich orange. And so here we go. Where are we going to start with this one? I want to get back, and I think the flowers, as far as I can see, I'm sort of happy with them at the moment until my eye sort of leaks out. Sometimes we think they're finished. At this point, I sort of think they are. But when I move forward painting some other areas, all of a sudden what I thought was finished needs to have a little bit more to it. So we have to be sort of open to that. But I'm going to start with going back into these little green traily things, whatever the heck they are, and maybe the leaves a little bit more too, just to sort of figure out what's going on with them. So here we go. So we're going to use more of this green, a little bit more, sort of some white to it. You see, isn't that a nice color? It's a really nice color. But having said that, we also need to add some yellow to it. So when we add yellow to it, we get that color, which is really sort of the color of that nice sort of turquoisey, yellowy kind of color that's in there, in the leaves. So I'm going to add a little bit more yellow, a little bit more white. Just wipe my brush a little bit, take off a little bit more yellow. So if I want to brighten that up, I'm going to use now the cad yellow middle. You're going to find that cad yellow middle is a much stronger color. Oftentimes people, when they're painting, they will use, to really lighten something up, they will think, oh, I'll use just cadmium yellow light. But, here we go, the big buts, is that cad yellow light doesn't have as much pigment in it as cadmium yellow middle and cad yellow deep. So if I really want to brighten something, like really brighten it up, see how that brightened that area up? Isn't that nice? That the cad yellow light wouldn't do that, because there's not enough pigment in it. There's not enough pigment in the yellow itself. And so this is why I always choose that middle to really brighten things up. I'm going to put a little bit in this corner here, a little bit, just because I want this corner to be a little bit brighter. But you have to be careful of your corners. You also don't want too many things, in fact nothing particularly, leading off your eye into corners. For the same reason, what happens when we lead our eye into corners takes our eye right off the canvas. We want to keep our eye on the canvas, and so we don't want things in corners that are very interesting. I mean, we can put things, I mean, obviously I got things here in the corner over here, but I don't want it overly detailed or too strong a color, because it will lead my eye right off the canvas. And obviously the point of the exercise is to keep your eye on the canvas. Now I've added a little bit of orange to this, because now I'm going to put a little bit underneath here like this. See how that rotates the underneath part of that leaf? And that's that orange. That's where that orange does that little magic trick for me, that very soft orange, where it starts to, and I can sort of put this sort of here and there a little bit, and for the same reason it will start to soften that edge, turn it around a bit, which is what I want. And it's a very subtle kind of thing. It's not, sometimes the things that we talk about are rather dramatic changes, and in this case it's not. We don't want that sort of dramatic change too much. We wanted a very subtle change. And I'm going to add some orange into this hookers. And I'm going to put that up in here. Again, orange and green, both of them are secondary colors, right? And so they're going to work really well together to soften areas or to turn an edge as well. I'm going to leave this fairly dark here because this is part of the stem that's coming closest to us. I don't want these areas, even though they look fairly dark, I don't want them that dark just for that reason, because we know very strong colors, very dark colors come forward. These areas are actually going away from us a bit. To bring this forward, just to give us the sense of this coming forward, I'm going to leave this fairly dark. As well, it's a little bit wider, which is sort of what we want as well. And I'm going to do a little bit of a soft orange. Now, I'm using a fairly big brush to do this. I could switch to a smaller brush, but I'm fairly adept at using these brushes, and this is a fairly new one, so the tip is the edges are pretty good. They haven't had a chance to sort of get all confuberated like they tend to do when we sort of are painting with our brushes over time. They start to get a little bit wonky. So I'm going to add a little bit of this sort of nice orange up here again, this orange and green. Again, see how that starts to soften that a bit? There's a little bit of this, sort of too much of this reddy undertone painting that's showing. So I'm going to take a little bit of that off because I don't want too much of it showing. Just for that reason, because it's further away. If it was down closer, I'd probably leave that underpainting of color showing through. But again, because it's going away from us, I'm going to add a little bit of this phthalo into there, a little bit more. There. So we're starting to get sort of a little bit of this stacking stuff going. Swipe my brush, come back into here. Nice soft sort of approach. This is looking a little bit too dark, as you can see, and it is dark in there, but not as dark as what I've got it. So again, this is sort of part of this. Whoops, somehow or other I got some red on my... If that happens, you happen to pick up something, your brush scrapes against something, just clean your brush. Take your brush, clean it off that area. Like if it's still in here, just take it, clean it off, because it will continue to be there, believe me. Take all that water off. Okay, so now we need to come back in here and make that color up here again a little bit more orange. So in creating these spots here in particular too, they are, I'm simplifying, I mean, you know, the colors that we're using, we're not using a lot of colors to sort of create what we're trying to do. Again, this is a little bit on the dark side, so I'm going to soften that one up a little bit. Soften this up in here, so I'm going to add a little bit more orange. Orange does the trick, right? Softens up a color, which is what we want. Soften that up. I want a little bit more of a highlight kind of thing happening on top. So I'm going to put a little bit more yellow, and that's going to give me that little brightness on top of that little spot. This one over here has this really nice bright yellow, orange, whatever, sort of coming forward. The light is just hitting on the tip. I love the light hitting on this little petal thing here. So I'm going to put that in because I really do like that. You're going to find that, you know, when you're painting, there's going to be certain spots that you really do like, and they're going to be sort of a lot more fun to paint than other segments of your painting, which is an interesting thing as well, that you need to realize that certain parts are going to be more interesting than others, but you have to be careful that you don't indicate that in your painting. Okay, so now I'm going to do a few sort of lighter spots, brighter, lighter spots. The other phrase that like to use often is that white lightens, does not brighten. So if we want an area to be like through here, like I did that spot right there, to be lighter, I could use a fair bit of white to create the lightness that I want, because it's not going to make it brighter. Again, it's one of those things when I come around to students and they're painting away, madly painting away, and I say, what are you trying to do? I'm trying to get this nice and bright. And I say, well, you're not going to do it by keep adding white. White will lighten, not brighten. So if you want to brighten a color, what do we add? Yellow. You've got it. That's it. We need to add yellow to our colors to brighten them. Now I'm going to continue sort of just pushing in some interesting little shapes. And again, when I'm painting flowers in particular, I'm more concerned about just seeing the tonal values and the shapes of things. I'm not really that concerned about. Now I'm going to, this is sort of an interesting little spot. This little spot, in doing this like that, is going to create the roundness of this stem by making this part, the change from the dark to the light on that angle and a little bit curved. And I'm going to come in behind here and make that a little bit darker in behind here a little bit, not too much, just a little bit. And that's going to as well create that nice little bit of roundness, as I said, to this stem. It's going to help it. I'm going to add a little bit more lighter stuff, lighter yellow on top of it a bit. Now there's some of this petal in behind that sort of has gotten lost when I did the background, and that's what people say. Well, then why do you do the background so late then? Why not do it first and then you can paint on top? Well, we can in certain instances, but for the most part, as I'm always saying, that we need to see what color our objects are going to be, and we aren't quite sure. As I was saying earlier, they do vary, and so I'm going to put back this little petal that's in here, and now that I've got my blue sky in there a bit, and I can do that, which is sort of now when I can start to add these sort of little touches. When I do have my blue sky in behind, I can start to add in these other little spots. Now I'm going to, at the same time, probably reduce down some of the red that's sort of poking through here. I do like that red coming through, mind you. I do like this little bits of red that are showing, but sometimes they can be a little bit too much. And this is where I can sort of come back and sort of control those by just little dabs of paint here and there that are going to just take those back a little bit, so there's not a lot of that red showing through, as I said. And the red is the underpainting that we did for the stems and the leaves, and I want some of that in there, but not as much as that is there. So again, now that I've got my background in, my background color, I can start to now do some of my edges. Now I go and I create these sort of very soft mauve or soft orangey mauve combination kind of, colors that I can start to now do my edges. And I'm start to, say for instance, this guy up here. This edge is looking fairly hard edged because it is, because I did my background color coming into it. I'm going to soften this edge a little bit with this very sort of soft orange, and I'm going to go off edge a little bit, so it's not quite, I'm going to sort of blur it, in other words. I want it softer looking, because this flower is further away from me. Just doing that little bit of touch is going to push that away. It's going to, and that's that sort of painting off edge that we've done in the past. And I'm going to add a little bit more orange up into here. Again, a little bit more orange. Again, orange being that magic color to secondary color, but it's a warm color, but it's also a secondary color, so it's going to sort of help push some of these things away, which is what I want. But now I've got a little bit of this orange on my brush. I'm going to touch up some spots here and there. Whoops, a little bit too much into the blue. And it's going to help soften my edges, add a little bit of warmth to what I'm painting. And at the same time, they'll give me those edges that I want, especially here. See this one again. So this great big wonking guy that we got here, I'm going to do a little bit, and it's not everywhere as you can see, it's just here and there. So it just softens so subtly those edges, and that's what I want. I want to soften up, turn those edges. So it's a bit of combo, a little bit of both, so it's sort of through color, which is I'm using this orange, at the same time as going off edge. So I'm just blurring up those edges. Even though certain things are coming closer to me, I still want those edges nice and soft. And I'm going to do a little bit more of this lighter part underneath here, because we do know as well from our fruit experiment when we way back when, can you imagine how far you've come when we first started doing all those fruit, and now this is what we're doing. It's really quite amazing, isn't it? That from those, well, remember we learned about that lightish undercolor that we started to do to put our edges under. So that's sort of what I'm doing here a little bit with these parts as well. A little bit of, especially underneath this leaf, so we can get sort of that. And it just takes a little spot here and there, nothing too major, especially on this big stem. Not so much there, a little bit there. Just ever so slightly. It's just a suggestion of things here and there. And that is, again, I think I talked about an artist by the name of Robert Bateman, and this is, strangely enough, his approach too, is that he uses these, gives you a little bit of detail, a little bit of indication of something, and then our eye assumes the rest. And I'm going to put some brighter colors in there, which I really like, because I wanted that nice sort of reflection right on that leaf there, which is so nice. A little bit nice. So then I can come over, and again, are my edges completely finished? Well, sometimes I put a color down and I'm thinking, well, it's a little bit too much, so then I'm going to come in and sort of fiddle with it and sort of do a little bit more. And I'm still going to leave some of these other colors, these nice warm colors, sort of showing through. I'm going to do these very interesting seedy things, because those are, people are going, well, how the heck do we do those? Well, I'm going to show you. We're going to put some cad orange out, a little bit of my ultramarine blue, which I don't have a lot of at the moment, but just enough probably that I can create a nice brown, sort of a nice warm brown. And I'm going to just sort of push in some of this here like this. Just a bit, not too much, but just, you know, and you're going to see what I'm going to do, because I'm just going to push some of this in here. Okay, that's about it. Now I'm going to change brushes. I mean, I think I can do this, what I want to do with this brush, but I'm going to actually change brushes because I think a smaller one is going to suit me better. So this is one of these instances where changing a brush is a good thing, and I think I might try a taper this time. So we have a nice little taper. When you want to keep the point on your taper, you're going to put it into the paint like this, and then give it a little bit of a twist, roll it between your fingers, a little bit of a twist like this, a roll between your fingers while it's on your, either on your canvas or on your palette. You'll get a point back to it. So this is what we want. So I'm going to create a little bit more of a orangey color, borrow from this a little bit. I'm going to add some cad yellow deep into this one with some of this orange. So I'm going to go sort of back and forth in this. Okay, so now over top of this sort of darker stuff that I've created, with my tapered brush, I'm going to do some of this fancy little doodad stuff that's happening here. And I assume this is the plant having gone to seed. Am I going to do all of them? No, I'm not. I'm going to do, a number of them. Get a little bit of a wonky little stuff happening. Clean my brush, because now I need to go and do some lighter stuff. So I'm going to come in here now and do some on top of here where it gets a little bit lighter. Into here like this. And again, this is one of these where we can do a little bit of detail. We don't have to do every little branch or every little, whatever those little things are called. And maybe a little bit into here, touch those up a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing down here now with these guys. But these are a little bit lighter, so I'm not going to. And now this is where we can sort of come over top of our blue sky, and however. But because this is sort of way down in here, I'm not going to worry about it too much. I don't want a lot of detail, because again, for the same reason, I don't want my eye down here. I'm adding more white to this. And now I can do a little bit of lighter stuff onto that, just where it's sort of coming out from the touch up a few more things as I see them. I can't resist. Can't resist! See another spot that I want to touch up. This one in particular here. So I'm just still using the same brush. Going to add a little bit of hookers and some orange. A little bit more orange. And sort of touch this spot up in here, because I don't want this again too dark. This part here I think is getting a little bit too dark in here, so I'm going to sort of lighten that up a bit. And again, it's just sort of going to reduce the value of all of that, because again, we don't want our eye down in there. Muck that up a little bit, change it up, a little bit more green. So it's at this stage, which is really, doing all these nice little finishing touches that are fun. We can sort of start to, just put a little bit of things in here. I'm going to sort of soften this green. This part in here is a bit too dark, and so we're going to soften that up a little bit. We don't need it quite so dark in there, for all the same reason that it is away from us and at the back here, and we don't want it quite so important, so we can sort of soften that up. I'm going to soften this green up in here too a little bit. Soften it as well. This one a little bit, this one. And sometimes it's just when you need to soften a spot, it's just a little spot that you need to touch. You don't need to sort of do the whole thing. I want this branch though coming forward, really coming forward. So I'm going, excuse me, I'm going to bring this into here a bit more and make this whole little, this guy too, a little bit darker like this. Now I should probably switch brushes back again. I'm being lazy here. Again, well, there we go. There's a good example of that, is that we get stuck using a particular brush. And I must admit that we're all sort of guilty of that. But sometimes it's sort of nice when we have these little finishing touches just to have a nice tapered brush like this that we can do nice little detail spots that we, we can just sort of add these, what I call little doodad spots here, that we can sort of get a little bit of detail. And we don't need a lot. We don't, we don't want a lot. Well, I don't anyway, particularly because I don't like a lot of detail. I like my brush strokes to sort of show up, and I want, bring that one forward a little bit more. This guy. No, I like the sort of blue that I sort of had on there, and I like that actually. And I'm going to add a little bit more of that because, again, blue is a primary, and it's going to help bring these forward. So strangely enough, just adding blue into this green is going to do that, which is sort of a nice thing. And it's, oops. You didn't see me do that. I just licked my finger and wiped something off. But, so I always say spit came before anything else. Now, actually, if that happens like that, the easiest thing to do is clean your brush and use your brush as an eraser and take it off. Take your finger and wipe it off a little bit more. But I do want that sort of that spot coming forward here, and it's not doing it for me. So I'm going to add some more of this into here. That phthalo green is really good for that. And I want this sort of a little bit more interesting there. I'm going to make this a little bit darker by adding some red to it, because red is our complementary color to green, and it's going to darken it, and it's going to give us that nice darkness that we need to bring something forward. And that's what I want into here, because this one actually is coming forward. Having used it there, I'm now going to push it into here a little bit more too. And that's, again, as you can see, starts to bring this part, this stem closer, and especially this one too. I'm going to put it down into here a little bit too. So it'll start to bring that stem a little bit closer to us. I'm going to darken this stem up here a little bit more. Now you're going to find, like I've done here, it's I need to either let that dry, which I do need to let that dry before I can come back into it again, because it will just start to lift. And there's a good example of that, where sometimes when we're painting, you'll find that you can only go over it so much, and then it starts to lift off. And so you either have to blow dry it. I'm going to come in here though, see if I can introduce a little bit of that background petal in behind there a little bit, which is sort of going to give that sort of an interesting spot. So a little bit of a peekaboo, which is sort of nice, which we sort of need. And then I can also clean up some of these edges too. So you can come back and clean up your edges sort of two ways. You can either do it from the object point of view, or you can come from the background point of view. Okay. Well, I think we sort of have spent a long time, and that's what you're going to find about doing flowers. They do take a while to do, and so be patient. Build your work up nice and slowly. Sit back. I probably would like to sort of sit with this a little bit longer, and then probably a day or two, and then come back and do a few more final touches. And that's sort of what you should be doing as well. And you're going to say, well, how do I know when a picture's finished? Well, exactly. It's when you stop seeing that you can't do any more of those little touches. And I mean little touches, not changing the whole color of the sky or whatever. This is sort of, so I can sit back, see how this is going to sort of settle in, and then if there's any little final touches, that's what I'll do. So what I've done is I'm somewhat finished, but what we need to do is to actually physically step away from our work. and I mean physically, step back from your work. When I'm painting here like this, I generally paint like this, but I'm up and down a lot, back and forth to my work to sort of see what I'm doing, because it's one thing to be painting here and painting up close, but you do need to get away from your work. I'm somewhat finished, but then I was thinking, oh, I don't know. So you've got to get away from your work, step back from it. Oftentimes it's to stop looking at the photo. Probably one of the things I say to my students as well. You have to sort of remove yourself from the photo, see what's happening to your painting. Is it happening for you or not happening? If it's not, then we have to discuss why it's not and sort of where to go with it. There's a couple of things that I'd like to put into this, which are the little seed things on the top of these little tendril things, whatever the heck they are. And you may notice, or not, I put out more ultramarine blue because I was running low on it. So now I'm going to make a very dark brown. So it's going to have more blue, less orange. And I'm going to put a few of these little seeds. Now, am I going to connect them totally to each stem? No, not particularly, because we don't see all these stems anyway, or these little stamen things, whatever they are. But I think it's sort of important to sort of put them in. And they can be, sometimes I'll just put one arbitrarily, like up in this, sort of connected close to wherever, but it doesn't have to be really. See, that one's not connected to anything in particular. And I think adding these is going to add just that little bit of interest. Now, I have less on my brush, which is good, because now I'm going to come in and put some down in here on these. And if I don't like it too much, I can also take my finger and sort of smudge a little bit, but or you just use your finger almost as an eraser kind of thing, or a stamp, just sort of push it, put your finger on and it'll lift off a bit. And I think that's sort of it a little bit. Now, we were talking about before how this part became, I was putting it in and it was becoming it was still sort of too wet kind of thing, and it wasn't adhering. But I think too, this got a little bit too dark on me. So I'm going to come in, I've sort of got a little bit more orange into here, and I'm going to just sort of sweep that over there like that, which I quite like more. A little bit more into that. And I'm going to put a little bit more on this edge here too of this orange, because it's going to give us that nice sort of highlight. Also, I don't like how this sort of stacked in here a little bit, so I'm going to break that up a bit. You can change spots, as you're seeing, by just some slight little touches. You don't have to come in and sort of repaint the whole area. Oftentimes it's just a little touch here and there that will make the difference, and that's all you need to do. You don't need to recreate, repaint all this all over again. Now, some of these little ones, I'm going to come in here though and lighten up a few of these spots, because I do want it a little bit, and I'm just going to dab it here and there just so it breaks it up. Break that up too. Okay, I think we're sort of there. You know what? There was one spot that I thought, and this is, watch this, this is sort of fun. I'm going to make that blue color for you, a little bit here and there, blah, 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 all those colors, right? A little bit more of that, a little bit more of that. Because there's one spot up here, and watch what happens to this painting when I put this in. It's such a minor little spot. But isn't that fun? I think it just sort of lightens it up completely. And the same thing through here. I'm going to put a little bit more of that blue through here, sort of, I can now see I can clean up rather that little spot. There's a little bit too much red there, so I can go over that and come in here. So this is sort of again where we can come in with our background color and create some interesting little things. We can sort of tighten things up, create little ins and outs that we sort of didn't have in there before, and I think it's like that little spot. I don't know why. Those little spots just give it to me. I just think they're just sort of fun to do. All right, I really do think we're sort of finished. I probably will find a couple of spots because I will live with this painting for another week or so, and there'll be a couple of other spots probably I'd like to change up, but for the most part, we're done. I really do hope you've enjoyed painting with me because I've really enjoyed having you, and I hope you've learned a lot. I think you have. And I'll see you next time, and gee, I wonder what we'll paint then. See you next time.